My therapist called it screen fatigue, like it was a minor inconvenience, like I'd simply been watching too many movies. What she meant, and what she eventually said more plainly when I wasn't getting better, was that I had spent so long living inside my own head, inside deadlines and metrics and the particular anxiety of always being reachable, that I had more or less lost contact with my own body. Find something with your hands, she said, something you can't do on a phone. I signed up for pottery the same way I did most things that year, impulsively, late at night, clicking confirm before I could think myself out of it. 6 weeks, Tuesday evenings, community studio in a building that used to be a warehouse and still felt like one. High ceilings, concrete floors, the good smell of wet earth and industrial cleaner. I showed up 10 minutes early and stood outside the door for 4 of them. There were 7 of us in the beginner class, which was small enough to feel intimate and large enough to hide in. I intended to hide. I was good at appearing engaged from a safe distance. I'd built a career on it. The instructor's name was Daniel. He came in from the back of the studio carrying a bag of clay like it weighed nothing, set it on the work table, and looked at us all in a way that wasn't evaluating. Exactly. More like he was simply registering that we were there. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, with hands that looked like they'd been doing this for a long time, and a kind of unhurried quality that I immediately found unsettling because I didn't know what to do with it. Nobody's made anything before, he said. Not a question. We all nodded except one man in the corner who said he'd taken a class in college. Daniel said, "Good, forget that." And there was a small laugh, and we began. The first session was about centering, getting the clay to sit still on the wheel before you could do anything else with it. It sounds simple. It is not simple. The clay wobbles and resists, and you push against it. And it pushes back, and the whole enterprise has an ego to it that I was not prepared for. I was terrible. I watched the woman beside me raise a small, wobbly cylinder on her first try, and felt a specific flavor of failure that I hadn't felt since I was new at my job a decade ago. I looked at my clay, collapsed, lopsided, refusing, and I pressed my lips together and tried again. A hand covered mine. I hadn't heard him come up behind me. His hands came over the backs of mine, warm, sure, not hesitant, and he said quietly, "Less force. You're fighting it." He guided my palms to cup the clay differently, applying pressure in a way I wouldn't have found on my own. I felt his chest close to my back. His arms bracketed mine. Feel that? Even pressure, all the way around. The clay steadied. I stopped breathing for a moment for reasons that had nothing to do with the clay. "There," he said. "Don't move." He stayed a second longer, hands over mine, both of us watching the wheel turn. Then he straightened up and moved on. I let out a breath so slowly it barely made a sound. Week 2, I was marginally better. Week 3, I was worse for reasons I couldn't explain, and I came in already tired and already frustrated and managed to collapse 3 pieces in a row before the session was halfway through. The woman beside me, Maya, a nurse with a laugh that filled the room, patted my arm and said some sessions were just like that. I knew some sessions were just like that. That didn't make it easier to sit inside one. Daniel came by, looked at the sad remains of my 3rd attempt, and said nothing for a moment. I waited for some kind of professional encouragement. He just asked, "What are you trying to make?" "A bowl." "What kind?" I paused. "A bowl kind." He sat down on the stool across the wheel from me, something he didn't usually do. The instructor's always standing, always moving. He rested his forearms on his knees. "What would you put in it?" I looked at him. "What? If you made it perfectly, what goes in it?" I didn't know what to do with the question. I sat there for a moment and then, because I was tired and my hands were covered in clay, and something about the studio made pretense exhausting, I said, "Keys by my front door. My keys and my phone and things I need to not lose." He nodded like that was precise and useful information. "Okay, then it doesn't need to be tall. And it needs a wider base than you've been making." He reached across and repositioned the clay without asking, and then looked up at me. "Try again." "I'll stay." He did stay. He didn't hover, he just sat across the wheel from me, watching the clay, occasionally saying something quiet and specific. The piece I made that night wasn't good, but it was finished. I put it on the drying shelf myself and stood there looking at it for a moment, and he came to stand beside me, shoulder to shoulder, both of us considering it. "It lists to the left," I said. "A little. Is that fixable?" After firing, no. He tilted his head. "But it has a character now. Things that list to the left are sometimes more interesting than things that don't." I looked at it for another moment. That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me this month. He glanced at me sideways. I hadn't meant to say that out loud. The studio was loud around us, wheels turning, music from someone's phone, Maya laughing at something. In the middle of it, Daniel just said, "That seems like it should change," and went back to check on someone else. I stayed looking at my lopsided bowl. Week 4, I left my phone in the car. I didn't plan to. I got halfway to the door and realized I'd forgotten it and stood there in the parking lot and then thought, and I don't know what possessed me, that I could just leave it, that nothing would happen in 2 hours that couldn't wait 2 hours. I went inside with just my keys. It was the best session I'd had. I don't know how to explain that except that my hands felt different when I wasn't waiting for a notification. After class, while the others were cleaning up, Daniel came to the drying shelf where I'd put 3 pieces, 3 more than any session before. And he looked at them the way he looked at everything, carefully and without performing an opinion. "You were different tonight," he said. Left my phone in the car. He looked at me. Then he looked back at the pieces. "Do that again." "Which part?" "Both." The last class was week 6, and I arrived with something between grief and anticipation sitting in my chest, which I recognized as a feeling I usually outran by staying busy. We had the full studio to ourselves. The other Tuesday class had been canceled, and our small group spread out in a way that felt almost celebratory, everyone making their best or their most ambitious pieces, the music a little louder. Maya made a vase with a dramatically uneven rim that she declared intentional. The man who'd taken a college class made something technically accomplished and somehow lifeless. I sat at my wheel and tried to make something small, not a bowl. I'd made enough bowls. I wanted to make something just because I wanted to look at it. My hands had gotten smarter over 6 weeks. That was the only way I could describe it. They knew things that I hadn't taught them, or that I had taught them so gradually I hadn't noticed the learning. The piece came up without fighting me. Small, slightly uneven, with a lip that curved in a way I hadn't planned and then decided to keep. When I finished, I held it in both hands for a moment. Daniel was across the room helping someone with a collapsed cylinder, his voice low and patient. I watched him work without meaning to. The specific quality of his attention, the way he treated every struggling piece of clay, like it was worth the time, like there was no such thing as a lost cause at the wheel. His hands moved with a certainty that wasn't arrogance, more like faith. A faith in the material that had never hardened into assumption. He looked up and caught me watching. I didn't look away quickly enough. He finished with the other student and crossed the studio. I held out the piece I'd made without quite planning to, still wet, still fragile. He took it in both hands carefully and looked at it for a long moment. "This isn't a bowl," he said. "No. What is it?" I thought about it. "I don't know yet. I just wanted to see what happened." He turned it in his hands. Something shifted in his expression, something he maybe didn't mean to show. He handed it back, and when he did, his fingers closed briefly around mine over the clay, not correcting, not instructing, just holding. "Fire it," he said. "See what it becomes." I looked down at our hands around the wet clay. The studio was winding down around us, wheels slowing, people talking. "The class is done after tonight," I said. "The studio's open Thursdays." He said it looking at the piece, not at me. "Open studio. No instruction. You just come and work." "By myself." A pause. "I'm usually here Thursdays." I looked up at him. He was still looking at the piece I'd made, this small, unnamed, still soft thing that I hadn't known. I was going to make until it was already in my hands. His expression was careful in a way that meant he was feeling something he hadn't organized yet. I thought about 6 weeks of leaving my phone in the car. I thought about what my hands knew now that I hadn't taught them. I thought about listing to the left and how sometimes that was more interesting. "I'll be here Thursday," I said. He nodded once, and then he went to help someone else. And I stood at my wheel with wet clay on my hands and something small and still, soft and not yet named, and I was already looking forward to seeing what the fire would do with it.